Good morning and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist Church. I'm happy to be with you today. I don't have my producer Clint with me, and so I'm not in the library, and we'll see how this goes. It's been a busy week again for all of us, and I got rained on twice. I don't know about you, but when we got that almost 2 inches yesterday at our house, I wasn't at home. I was out showing houses, and I got a little bit wet. But that's okay. It's all good. So we're going to continue in our study in the book of Job. And I'm going to again summarize the chapters that we're going to skip as we go forward to the verses that are for our lesson today. And so the chapters that I'm going to summarize are starting with chapter 29. And in 29, Job is speaking, and he talks about how great the past was and how things were good and his life was good, and everything between him and God was good. And then he goes on into chapter 30, where he begins to talk about the present troubles and how things have changed, and again that he's an innocent person and he's not quite sure why God has changed the way that he's treating him, or the way he feels God is treating him. And then in chapter 31, he continues to talk about his integrity and saying, that he's not done anything wrong, by going down a list of things. Now he's giving a list of things he has not done, such as he has not left the hungry to starve, and he's not, left the orphan to be alone, or whatever. There's a whole list of things that he says, I've not done these things. And so then we get to chapter 32, and in chapter 32, a new friend shows up in the picture. Now he's had these 3 other friends that have all given him advice, or judged him, I guess you might say, with their words, and saying, well, you must have done something wrong. That's been the general theme of their speaking. And so now a new friend comes on the scene. Friend, I'll say that in quote marks. His name is Elihu. So we had Eliphaz before, Bildad, and who was the other one? Anyway, we had the 3 others, but Elihu is this one. And Elihu says that, or it says in chapter 32, verse 4, Elihu had waited to speak to Job because the other 3 were older than him. And that is that's customary, the way that things would have happened in that society, and even today in that part of the world, that elders are going to speak first and say what they have to say, and then people younger than them in a certain pecking order would be free to give their opinions after the elders have said what they wanted to say. So Elihu jumps in, and he begins to talk about the reason that he waited, because he was younger, and he thought that wisdom should speak before him, or age should be equated with wisdom, and all of that. But almost immediately then, in chapter 33, Elihu begins to, I guess, elevate himself in a way by, letting it be known that his opinion even surpasses their opinion, I think. He knows better. You know, he's what we call him, a whippersnapper. He knows better than they do. And he even claims to be speaking for God. The other three friends, you know, they said things about, well, God does this and God does that. They gave attributes of God in the way that they spoke. But they didn't say, you know, I'm the spokesperson for God. I'm telling you what you need to know. But Elihu kind of, you know, puts that spin on it to say, you know, I know so much that I'm really actually speaking for God. And that's a really dangerous thing, isn't it? To begin to have such a strong opinion that you equate your opinion with what God thinks, you know. And I mean, we do have prophets in the Bible that spoke the words of God. And even today in our society, we have people who prophesy, who speak the words that God has given them to speak. And in that way, they speak on behalf of God to a certain subject or whatever. Pastors, maybe, but also sometimes other people. But to go around and claim, you know, even for a pastor, oh, I'm speaking the words of God, you know, that's a very bold statement, isn't it? And you know, you are elevating yourself. And what does the Bible say? Pride goeth before a fall. You know, that's something we need to be very careful about. Now, Elihu continues on, you know, with a similar theme of saying, obviously you've done something wrong, or this wouldn't be happening. And so his interpretation of it hasn't really changed in what he says to Job, except that it's a little more harsh, I guess you might say. And he talks about, you know, the things that God does when a person has been wicked, you know, and we'll get into some of that. But there is one verse that I wanted to point out because I don't want to skip over it without mentioning it. And that is in chapter 34, verses 14 and 15. You know, Elihu does what the other three friends also did, and even Job. Throughout the course of this, I said last week, they are speaking of some of the attributes of God. And even though we may not respect Elihu in the way that he came across, he is throwing some truth in there about the attributes of God along with his line of reasoning. And one of those things that he says then is in chapter 34, verses 14 and 15. He says about God, if he should determine to do so, if he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. And, you know, that's a profound statement, but very true. And we don't think of it in that way, that, you know, we exist, all of us in the world exist because of the grace of God or the mercy of God. You know, with the way that things happen, it's a wonder God doesn't just wipe us all out. But what this verse is saying, that if God withdrew his breath from our bodies and his spirit, we would all humanity would perish at one time. And he could do that. You know, if he became so annoyed with the way people live their lives and the choices that they're making, that he just said, I'm just going to have a do-over. I'm going to start all over with humans and see if they can't do better next time. He could do that. He's God, and he could do that. And he loves us, and he's, you know, probably not going to. But it is important for us to understand God in his power, that without his intervention, we would not live another second. And I think that's something that we don't think about very often, but we should, because it's very important. And so Elihu, begins to talk about justice with Job, and begins to speak of how God deals justly with people, and how if you are having problems, it has to be because God is punishing you for something. And we have a lot of talk about justice in the world today. Everybody wants justice. And I've been thinking about that as I studied this lesson this week. I do think that things should be fair for everyone, that our legal system should be fairly applied to everyone, and that the way that people are treated should be fairly applied equally to everyone. That's America. That's what we stand for. But I hear a lot of people calling for justice, and what they really mean, and what they've substituted that word for, is we want the outcome that we wanted. And so if we don't get the outcome that we wanted, justice has not been served. And, I guess I'm more idealistic maybe than that. I feel like there does exist truth in the world, and it's not my truth or your truth. It is the truth. And, I have faith that at the end of things, justice will be served, or truth will be served, and things will be fair, to all. You have to have that, I think, idealistic view, or else you become a very negative person. And so, when you hear somebody say justice was not done, then you may have to think about what exactly are they talking about. Is it that their choice, their way that things should have happened was not done, or is it really that justice was not done? And if that's the case, then something needs to be done to fix that. And so that's just a rabbit that I was chasing now. That's not a part of the lesson. That was all free information. Let's go on then, and let's begin on the verses for this week. And it's going to be, the words of Elihu as we start off here. So we're going to start in chapter 36 of Job and verses 8 and 9. So Elihu is talking about the way that God deals with people. And he says some things here, like I said, that may be partial truths, but maybe not the whole truth. And so in verses 8 and 9, he says, if they are bound in fetters and are caught in the cords of affliction, then he declares to them their work and their transgressions, that they have magnified themselves. Okay, so he's, in this part of the discourse, he's talking about how if you're caught in the cords of affliction, in other words, you're tied up by an affliction like what Job has, boils all over his body, and the other things that have happened to him, then this is God declaring to you your work. In other words, it's your punishment for what work you had done, or the sinful work, whatever it was that you had done, and that you have now magnified to a point that God has done this to you. And so, he's very harsh with Job in his judgmental attitude about the Job's situation. And then let's go on to verses 10 and 11. He opens their ear to instruction and commands that they return from evil. If they hear and serve him, they will end their days in prosperity and their years in pleasures. So again, he's saying, turn away from this evil that you have obviously done, and then, God's going to cause you to prosper, and you'll end your days in prosperity. And we wish that it always was that way, that God only allowed bad things to happen to the wicked, and if you were right and followed God correctly, that you would just be prosperous all the time. But we know that that is not the case. And for whatever reason, God allows us to go through trials. The book of James refers to that and says that as we go through trials, it makes us a stronger person. But these, we can't always explain why a righteous person or a person who has been trying to do right goes through a trial, and sometimes very difficult trials, and then why does this person that seemingly does wicked things over and over again ends up prospering somehow? A drug dealer or somebody that ends up with plenty of money and no worries in the world, or it seems that way, it looks that way. Now we know that ultimately the person who has done right and has followed God will be saved, and overall those who live a righteous life or try to, God blesses them and they do prosper. And the wicked are punished, they do receive consequences. And we can see that. There was a place, I think I might have mentioned this before, but there was a village that we used to pass through in Nigeria, and it was called Majuju. And it was way out in the bush and not very huge, but you could pass all the way through town in a few minutes. And as you passed through town, you first entered into the Christian side of town where there were churches and there were Christians, and then you kind of reached a line of demarcation and you passed through the Muslim side of town, and then you went on. And there was a very stark difference between those two sides of town. On the one hand, on the Christian side, it was more prosperous. The houses were nicer and cleaner, and it was still the bush and still very basic living, but you could see that they had some things. And then you got to the other side, and it was just poverty, really poverty, and things were dirty, things were worn out, you could just see it. And in a lot of ways, in the towns and villages that we visited, you could sort of see that contrast. And I don't like to, it says in our book and in the Bible too, it refers to Job as a righteous man, and it refers to a righteous man, in some other verses. I don't really like to use that phrase. It makes me uncomfortable to use it, because none of us is truly a righteous person. We all do things that we should not do. And you don't have to look very far, for me, to look at me and find something that I ought to improve on. And anybody else is in the same boat with that. No matter how hard we try, we're not going to get it all right. And none of us are a righteous person. If a person refers to themselves as a righteous person, then you've got to have a question mark in your mind about that. But because we follow Jesus, God makes us righteous because of the blood of Jesus. And we are right before God. And that's really the most important thing, is that we are right before God. And the rest of it we must try. We should try. Paul mentioned, that we're not going to go out and live any way we want to just because we know that we have grace. That's not the way it works either. We must be righteous as much as possible. Okay, let's go on. So in verses 12 to 14 now, let's see. But if they do not hear, they shall perish by the sword, and they will die without knowledge. But the godless in heart lay up anger. They do not cry for help when he binds them. They die in youth, and their life perishes among the cult prostitutes. So now he's adding, insult to injury, and to say that if you're a wicked person, as he's describing Job to be, then you're going to die without God, and not only that, you're going to end up your life with the cult prostitutes or male prostitutes in the cults. So, he's becoming insulting on top of being judgmental, and saying, cursing Job, I guess, really, and saying, this is what's going to happen to you. We have to be careful not to curse a person and say, this is, if you keep on doing that, this is what's going to happen. Because that's like cursing that person, to say that we don't know what's going to happen to them. We really don't. We might say this could happen, or even that this should happen, if that's our opinion, I guess, but we don't know, and we have to choose our words carefully, really. None of us gets what we deserve. That's for sure. Okay, now let's go on to verses 15 and 16. He, meaning God, delivers the afflicted in their affliction and opens the ear in time of oppression. Then indeed he enticed you from the mouth of distress, instead of it a broad place with no constraint, and that which was set on your table was full of fatness. In the book, that one is a little bit obscure, I think, that verse 16. In the book it says, indeed he lured you from the jaws of distress to a spacious and unconfined place. Your table was spread with choice food. So, again, he's repeating what he said before, that if you turn away from this evil that you're doing, then he's going to just make you prosper. And, that is that's the way the gospel is presented by some pastors even today, particularly televangelists, that if you're doing right, if you're following God and you're doing all the things that you should, or that I say you should, then everything is going to be good for you. Your clothes won't wear out and your roof will never leak. Everything is going to be good for you. And then verses 17 to 21, but you were full of judgment on the wicked. Judgment and justice take hold of you. Beware that wrath does not entice you to scoffing, and do not let the greatness of the ransom turn you aside. Will your riches keep you from distress, or all the forces of your strength? Do not long for the night when people vanish in their place. Be careful, do not turn to evil, for you have preferred this to affliction. So he's just continuing now with the insults. He's saying that Job has wrath, and he's putting emotions onto Job that are not characteristic of the way that Job has acted in the past. He's saying that Job is obsessed with all of this, and basically that Job has brought it on himself. And then the last two verses 22 and 23, behold, God is exalted in his power. Who is a teacher like him? Who has appointed him his way? And who has said, you have done wrong? So he's still insulting Job even with this part by accusing Job of saying that God has done wrong. And Job has not said that. You know, Job may have felt that God's got it wrong in allowing these things to happen to him. And I mean, he said, something's wrong. It's not going right. This is not the way things are supposed to happen. I don't understand, why, and things like that. But Job has not come to the point of accusing God of doing wrong, as Elihu has said here. So again, this is just an example for us, and an example for us to not follow, I guess you might say, of how you can put yourself in the seat of judgment on a person. You can look at their situation, and you can look down your nose and say, well, obviously this has happened because of whatever, that you might point out about that person that they've done wrong. But the problem with that is that we've all done wrong. None of us deserve the blessings that we have in our lives. And we need to humbly always remember that. As I remember when the Twin Towers were bombed, or the airplanes struck the towers and all of that, and Osama bin Laden. And, you just thought, why is it that God doesn't just zap him with a bolt of lightning and be done with it, Why doesn't the judgment that should come to him, why hasn't it come yet? And I heard someone, I think it was on the radio during that time, that made the statement, God does not desire for anyone to perish, but he desires everyone to turn from their sin and follow him. And for that reason, we should not sit in the seat of judgment against a person, because God desires everyone to turn to him. And if we can keep that in mind, and if we can see it the way God sees it, then we can maybe begin to share the gospel with someone that otherwise we looked at them as being a person that we don't want to be around. So I think that I'll stop there for today, and we'll continue on next week. The chapter next week that we're going to focus on, let me tell you that, is chapter 40. So we'll have a 2 or 3 chapters there that we're going to skip, and then we'll continue on with Job chapter 40. So thank you for being with me, and I hope you have a great 4th of July holiday, and I'll see you next time.